There we go. We finished up the first section on income politics and policies. One part of that I didn't cover that I'm going to mention very briefly here at the beginning is with the increasing number of labor unions in which many of the manufacturing jobs were unionized, that helped income level because unions could bargain for better wages or better working conditions. Unions had the power to influence their companies if they went on strike. So labor unions were an important component to income level increasing. And because the government allowed unions, remember before Teddy Roosevelt, big business was favored by government. But with Roosevelt, when he came in, government started to regulate businesses and allow the people, the employees, to have unions. So we're going to move to our second section in chapter 16. And this is about social welfare policy, welfare policies and politics. The three things that we're covering in chapter 16 are income politics, social politics, and education politics. And we'll get to education on Wednesday. Social welfare is basically a result of poverty in the United States. Currently, about 1 out of 7 American families live below what is called the poverty line. I've kind of got these backwards, but that's okay. And I'll get them straightened out before I post them on the course homepage. But the poverty line or the poverty level is basically an amount of money that the government comes up with this formula. And this formula is found in your textbook on page 482. But what they basically say is whatever it costs for a family to feed themselves in 1 year, and they're talking about a realistic, thrifty budget. So whatever a family's food budget is, multiply that times 3, because you got to then include housing costs, you have to include other necessities, and you have to include clothing. And so that's how they come up with the poverty line. And anybody who makes less than that is below the poverty line. Now, in our textbook, it tells you what the poverty line was for 2016, and it hasn't changed that much going to 2018. For example, a one-person household, if they made less than $12,228, they were below the poverty line. a 4-person household was around $24,000, $25,000. So think of a mom, dad, 2 sons or 2 daughters, or a son and a daughter, a family of 4. If they make less than, let's just say 25,000, they are considered in the lower class, the poor. They're below the poverty line. The 2019 levels are a tad higher. A husband and wife married today, or let's say a husband and wife were married last January 2019. And by the end of the year, if they had made basically less than $17,000, they were considered in the lower class income level, poor, which equals about $1,400 a month to live on. And that averages to about making $8.13 an hour. So if any of you are looking at getting married after you graduate from high school, whether that's this coming May in 2021, this is going to be about what the poverty level is for a married couple. If I were counseling a couple who was wanting me to do their wedding, I would say, okay, we do a session on finances. If you're going to basically live comfortably, you're going to have to get on a budget. And let's say they're right at the poverty level, they make about $1,400 a month. You need to make a budget. How much of that a month is going to be for food, how much for bills, etc., etc., etc. Alrighty, so social welfare programs and policies are designed to help those basically and mainly in the lower class poor category. Now, a little bit of history on this subject. Before the Great Depression, social welfare was something that the state governments pretty much took care of. It was not a federal thing. So in the 1920s, or let's say 1920, 100 years ago, people in Oklahoma who were poor, there were no federal programs in which they could apply for financial assistance. They had to get it through state programs or the state government. And state programs, state assistance was not that substantial. There was still a strong ethos in our society about individuals taking responsibility for themselves. And so if you were poor, you primarily depended upon family and friends to help you. You might get a little assistance from the government, the state of Oklahoma. Certainly people would see if there were churches that had maybe food banks or clothing. Were there shelters, people who lived in big cities? Were there shelters, homeless shelters or food shelters, something like that? but there was no federal programs. Well, with the onset of the Great Depression, beginning in 1929 through the 1930s, and then the double whammy of the Dust Bowl, which basically destroyed agricultural production during that time. There was a lot of people who went into that lower class category of being poor. And so with the election of FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, he instituted a massive program that he called the New Deal in order to help Americans. But before we look at those things, when we talk about social welfare, we're talking about programs and policies that are designed to help people in the society. It provides services or resources for those people who need it. And you can see how these programs are established. All right, so Franklin Roosevelt followed Herbert Hoover. And if you remember, Hoover was kind of he was not a steward type of president. He was the kind that, you know, is hands off. So he didn't get involved a lot in the problems leading up to the Great Depression. He didn't lead the government to get involved. So a lot of people blamed him. And that's when Roosevelt was elected, and that Republican era was broken. And Roosevelt brought in sweeping new legislation to alleviate the suffering of Americans. Roosevelt and his programs were so successful and so well received that he is the only president to serve more than 2 presidential terms. He served for 3 full terms. He was elected a 4th time, and then he died while he was in his 4th term. Before his presidency, there were no term limits on the president, office of the president. After he had served began a 4th term, they added the amendment that said presidents can only serve for 2 terms. But anyway, his New Deal focused on the 3 R's. And you'll want to be familiar with these 3 things: relief, recovery, reform. Relief programs provide money to people in the form of checks, and also job programs to help lower the unemployment rate. One such example is the Civilian Conservation Corps. Another relief program that many of us might be more familiar with is the Works. Works, where'd you go? The Works Progress Administration, the WPA. Chances are, if you drive through your hometown of Howe or Vian or Arcoma, or if you go up to Poto or over to Salisaw, you can see a building or a bridge that was built by people in the WPA program. Maybe your high school gymnasium was built. Now I know Howes wasn't. Howes has a nice new gymnasium, but some of the smaller schools in this part of Oklahoma still have a gymnasium that was built by the WPA, and they're really cool looking buildings. They make them out of rocks from the area usually. So that's an example of a relief program to lower the unemployment. Recovery programs are to help stimulate industry, agriculture, because the farmers were hit so hard because of the Dust Bowl, as well as the economy. And then reform programs work to correct problems in the economy. And they're a preventative type of measure to hopefully prevent future depressions. The most famous, I would say probably after the or right above the WPA, the most well-known New Deal program is the Social Security Administration. People today still pay into Social Security with their paychecks. This graph here shows you more of the programs in each of those 3R categories. Not all of these programs are still around. Many of them were designed to be temporary. But then there are some, like the Social Security Act, that are still around. I believe the Tennessee Valley Authority is still around. That began with building a dam in the Tennessee Valley area and producing, a dam that also generated electricity that powered the Tennessee Valley area. Also, the dam was designed to cut down on flooding, which would destroy croplands. And so you've had many dams built because of this program to manage the land area, to cut down on flooding and the destruction of farmland, but also to create energy and electricity. And one of the largest dams in the world, longest dams in the world, is in Disney, Oklahoma. The Pensacola Dam is 1 mile long. It connects Disney and Langley, Oklahoma. But the Grand River Dam Authority is similar to the Tennessee Valley Authority. It was designed to control basically climate damage, but also to harness and produce electricity and energy. So FDR's New Deal in the 1930s was the turning point for how federal government is involved in social welfare. Before, the states took care of it. Now, federal government becomes the primary player in social welfare. Some people would say this was basically the explosion point of big government in America. In the 1960s, the second big wave, and this is probably a bigger explosion point than the 1930s. But Lyndon Johnson, or LBJ, when he became president after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, he instituted what he called his Great Society. Make sure you know about these two big waves of federal government inclusion into social welfare. FDR's New Deal and LBJ's Great Society. The Great Society, one of their major platforms was a war on poverty. "40 programs that were initiated to eliminate poverty." Now, there weren't even 40 programs or 40 there weren't even 40 programs total in the FDR's New Deal. But LBJ's, his single platform on the war on poverty had 40 programs that were designed to, again, improve living conditions, but also to help people lift themselves out of the cycle of poverty. It wasn't government trying to do it for the people. These things were designed to assist people in doing it themselves. Here are some of the programs that were instituted. Probably one of the most well-known that we still know of today is the Food Act, the Food Stamp Act. Food stamps are still a vital program to so many of the poor in our nation. Another significant one is Medicaid. Medicaid is health insurance for the poor. And with Medicaid came the debate that still rages today in our government. How involved should the government be with health care for people's lives? Now, Medicaid was set up to be insurance for the poor. Since the 1960s, since the Great Society, there have not been a whole lot of programs for social welfare passed up until today. But the most significant one was the 2010 Affordable Health Care Act, or what we usually hear it called Obamacare. And just as Medicaid kicked off the debate in the 60s between Republicans and Democrats about government being involved in health care, the Affordable Health Care really highlighted the differences of opinion between the Republicans and Democrats. The Affordable Health Care Act was designed to make sure every American has health care. And that has been, and still is to this day, a major point of contention. This slide just kind of summarizes these two big waves of federal government involvement. It just sums up what we said earlier. There's the 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. The New Deal, the Great Society, create a higher standard of living and equal opportunity that would help everybody have a better quality of life. So this one basically is a response to a very, very critical crisis, the Great Depression. LBJ and his Great Society came during the Civil Rights era. It wasn't John F. Kennedy who got it passed, but LBJ. I mean, Kennedy would have had it passed, but LBJ had a dream of creating a great society in which all Americans were enjoying a higher standard of living, and as many Americans as possible had equal opportunity to achieve that. The thing that hurt LBJ was he inherited this little thing that was starting to flare up in this little Far East country called Vietnam. It had just begun to flare up under Kennedy, and that's what LBJ inherited. And so instead of him getting to focus primarily on the Great Society, he had to deal with the Vietnam War. These are still out of order, but that's okay. I'll get them fixed. Actually, I don't have the slides complete, but I'll follow along with the outline in the textbook and try to get some slides added. So if you want to follow along there, you can go to page 489. Actually, 486. So a lot of these programs that were designed are what we call public assistance programs, right? They're designed to assist the public. But not everybody is eligible to receive assistance. You have to pass what's called, and this is on page 488, you have to apply and pass a means test. And the means testing is something that is in line with our American cultural value of individualism. We still believe that America is a place where individuals can, strive for the American dream. Individuals who, using initiative in industry, can better themselves. And people who are needing public assistance they wanted to make sure they were helping people who were still trying to help themselves. That American value of individualism, individual responsibility. And so these means tests were designed to make sure that the people who truly were trying to improve or lift themselves up were getting a helping hand. There was one program that was designed for single mothers who had children. they found themselves as a single parent, either because the father died or deserted the family. And so this program was a very popular one, but there was no limits to it. Initially, the idea was, or the belief was, is that once these mothers get the assistance they need and they're able to, you know, by either finding their own jobs or finding another source of income, maybe through family, they'll get off of these programs. But not everybody was doing that. So eventually in the 90s, they reformed that program and said you only can get this assistance for this long. Now, one of the results of these welfare programs was, if you're giving aid to people, then we had to have social workers, we had to have caseworkers who would monitor the folks receiving the aid to make sure, you know, to check in on them, to make sure things were getting better. And I lost my thought. Maybe you'll come back here in a little bit. See, I was discussing how they had revised this program in the 90s to where, okay, yes, you can only receive the benefits for a certain amount of time. The assumption was you would, let's say you get this aid for a year. That is, the incentive is you're going to lose these benefits in a year's time. So hopefully that will motivate you to go out and find a job. But if you, let's say in a year's time, you had not found a job, but let's say you had been looking for a job and you still were looking for a job, caseworkers would be able to say to the program's administrators, I've been monitoring this person. They have been trying to find a job. They have not been able to. I believe they should be able to get an extension. So the whole idea is that the government is not going to do everything for you. These programs, these public assistance programs, are designed to help you as you are putting forth an effort to help yourself. Now on 489, there are some other kinds of welfare policies called social insurance programs. And these are not so much as in public assistance programs as they are what we call entitlement programs. For example, if you lose your job, many people lost their jobs starting back in March and April with the pandemic. But they had been paying into, you know, whenever we get a paycheck, some of the money is taken out to pay taxes, but other percentages of the money are to go to some of these social insurance programs. One such program is called unemployment. If you were to lose your job, like many did in the pandemic, you had paid so much into the unemployment program that you would be eligible to receive an unemployment check. Actually, you'd be entitled to it because you paid into it. That's why it's called an entitlement program. The most well-known entitlement program of social insurance is Social Security. Currently, 6.2% of your paycheck is taken out and put into Social Security for you. Not only that, but your employer also pays 6.2% on your behalf. So if you're working somewhere, you're getting about 12.5% a year put into Social Security. Social Security is actually a social insurance program for those who retire. Originally, when you reached the age of 62, that was the retirement age. You would retire from work and you would start then drawing a monthly check from Social Security. Again, you're entitled to this because you paid into it. I think the retirement age has been raised to 65 years old now. But these are not public assistance programs. These are considered entitlement programs because you are the one who paid the taxes in. Programs like food stamps and other such programs are considered, quote, a handout instead of an entitlement. And those are the ones that are considered public assistance programs. In other words, social insurance is earned, whereas the anti-poverty programs are basically handouts. Any questions on the section on welfare politics and policies? Okay, we finish up chapter 16 on Wednesday and start in chapter 17. And until that time, have a good week. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.